Hey guys, it's Josh here from Marques Flooring again, and today we're going to bring you our latest episode of Third Thursday Training. Today we're going to be doing leveling and primers and a little bit of adhesives with the team from Mapei. This one's going to actually be a little bit different. Instead of it being in our warehouse for our own training, we're actually taking our team up to the Mapei Academy. So after you see my face, it's going to jump straight into the actual training. Down below in the comments, you're going to see a whole lot of links so you can jump to different sections of the video. We did another video on the same topics at another time, and that was episode 2. So if you want a bit more detail on there, I hope you enjoy the video. Like I said, make sure you jump to the different spots where you need to. Please like and subscribe so you can keep up with the latest ones, and I'll see you at the next one.
Thank you very much for coming today. I'm just going to start off with the basics and then go right into the heavy duty detail. So absorbency. Here we've got on this top row a primer, which is our Primer G, and on the bottom is our Eco Prim T Plus. So when you don't have, when you've got porosity, you can see the colour of the water changing there. And when you control that loss of moisture, that is where the primers come into play, the acrylic primers. So here we have neat Primer G, and as you can see, the water is not changing colour. This is Primer G. 1 is to 1, 1 is to 2, and 1 is to 3. Concentrate primer, 1 is to 3 primer. See the difference? Because we've diluted the concentrate to 1 is to 3, you get absorbency, but not as much as no primer. Okay? And what that does to a self-leveling compounds introduces pinholes. Alright? That's why priming is very, very important. But understanding what your substrate's doing is even more important. Again, bare substrate, this is Eco Prim T Plus, so neat primer, 1 is to 1, 1 is to 2. As you can see, as you dilute it from neat to 1 is to 2, you start to slowly lose the moisture in your leveling compound. Okay. Then we come across to, so that's absorption of a substrate. Too much absorption is this one here. See that? That's just sucking the moisture straight out of your leveling compound, or anything for that matter, if you're applying on top of it. No absorption is a concrete substrate that's got a curing compound or a release agent on it, which has to be removed. If you don't remove that mechanically, and you try and put a primer on top of that, not a good idea. How do you remove it to get it back to porosity? Is you introduce diamond grinding head. As soon as you open up the surface, you have porosity. When you don't open up the surface, you have 0. This concrete substrate hasn't been opened up. It's a highly dense concrete surface, 40 MPa, because it's in an industrial warehouse. Has point loading that's very severe on the racking, so it has to be high MPa, helicopter finish, very dense, no porosity in that whatsoever. Water's not changing colour, and it won't until you profile it in a diamond grinding head. That's a small hand version. You get the big machines that have got the planetary heads, etc., etc. So do we understand the concept of absorbency? How we control that by dilution of the primers, depending on what primer is recommended for the self-leveling compound, versus heaps of porosity, versus a curing compound on the surface or a highly steel trowel finish. So the mechanisms are all available to be able to control that. And if you don't prep the surface, and everything that you're putting on top of the surface could go north. In the case of timber flooring, because it's a living organism, with moisture it expands, with heat it contracts. That puts a lot of loading on the adhesive, puts a lot of loading on the self-leveling compound, puts a lot of loading on the substrate that it's connected to. So understanding these concepts is very, very important. Let's go a little bit further down the track. Concrete slabs poured, pissing down rain. We have a lot of humidity in the concrete. We might have a green concrete slab that's just had copious amounts of water. You need to use a moisture vapor barrier to suppress that. We have two, which the boys have gone through with you upstairs. One is called Prim Grip, and the other one's called Mapepur Turbo 1K. The 1K is one component application. Comes in a 10 litre little container behind you. The other one is Prim Grip, which is the one next to it, which is a 2-part. Now, I like explaining the difference between the two. The 1K Turbo goes up to 95 RH, whereas the Prim Grip is 100%. So again, the preparation of the substrate is very, very important. Now, if you, for example, don't remove or prepare the surface like I've done here with any compound that you're applying onto the top of, see how you get these yellow marks here? Mm-hmm. That is because the surface has still got resistancy on it. It's not allowing to go through. So if we come onto site, or if you ring our reps and you say, oh, there's yellow sections like this, it means that that surface hasn't been profiled properly. And it also could be old adhesive that's been left there, because sometimes, in the case of Lismore at the moment, and down in New South Wales, there's a lot of flood waters that have gone through there, and there's been years and years of levelling compounds that have been placed, because it happens regularly that that place gets flooded. So there's a tendency not to grind back to the original substrate. Very dangerous. So when you don't do that, you get this type of thing, and then everything else that's going on the top of it that's new ain't going to work. So it's very important that that is understood, that we can see when this happens that you get issues. You can also be going over the thickness of 10mm with your self-leveling compound. We recommend to broadcast with sand. So under 10mm you can use the primers. Over 10mm you have to broadcast sand. The reason for that is because when you've got a high thickness of leveling compound, the intensity of grabbing the floor is higher, the mechanical key is better. When you do apply the sand, you can't have what's called bald spots like this. See the bald spot there? That's a spot that's been missed by the broadcasting of the sand. When you go to put your leveling compound over the top of that, it's trying to grab the surface, it's got nothing to grab, it's going to crack. If you've got big areas like that, bigger problem. Because it's just like going over a glassy surface, yeah? But that just has to have more either 1K Turbo or the Prim Grip applied, and you throw some more sand onto it. But they're called bald spots. But the biggest thing that I see is this type of thing, where you might get that particular area and bigger on site, because normally on site they're bigger. And because of that, the whole area gets ripped up and redone, because this wasn't done properly initially. And that's a big problem, huh? Because you haven't got X-ray vision to see this once the leveling compound's down. So bald spots are very important. Understanding that you've got to sweep up the excess sand before you put the leveling compound is even more critical, because if you've got all loose sand there, the leveling compound's grabbing the loose sand and not the mechanically keyed surface that you've created using either the Mapepur Turbo 1K or the Prim Grip. And if you feel that, it's like bloody sandpaper. Alright?
The other thing with that too, you know how with the moisture vapor barriers we say we've got a 24-hour period for that chemical reaction and all the rest of it. if you do sand like that, you can leave it for up to a week or whatever and still put your leveling point down.
So long as other trades don't drop all their shit on top of it.
Yeah.
The grip, Eco Prim Grip, same principle, huh? Except it's already got the sand in it, the grip. Okay? So if we're going over timber floors, so that's your yellow tongue. That's the yellow tongue sanded with a 80 grit sandpaper. That's the Eco Prim Grip, roller applied. And that's your Ultraplan Renovation applied at 15mm thick. Then your P990 and your timber floor. So, most important part of this conversation here, which we'll get into that a little bit later on, is the Ultraplan Renovation has got special little fibres in it, like fibres that you put in concrete, and it's designed to go over timber flooring, because timber flooring moves around. So you need to have that extra reinforcement in the levelling compound to hold it together.
How thick can you bring with this material?
The range is up to 40mm.
3mm to 40.
So
it's 3mm
sand
minimum.
it, 80 grit,
Yep.
Or 40.
apply that,
Yep.
let it dry, come back next day and apply those ones.
Well, this is quick drying.
Keep drying. Okay. So what is the process? It's like put a primer or a glue on top first, then applying like the sand on top to make a grip.
This here, no, it's already
come like sand.
I'll show you what that looks like.
Okay.
I'll show you what that looks like. Show you
What is the coverage for it?
Pretty much, it depends on the flatness of the surface, right? So the yield is and also the type of roller that you use. Okay, so the yield
50 square metres for a 10.
10 kilo?
25 for a 5 kilo.
200 to 300 grams per square metre. Yeah, if you take what Troy says to you, that's more the reality of what the contractors get on site per bucket.
That's what you put on tiles as well.
Here's a tile. Here's a tile as well. Timber tile.
So that's for primer the tiles?
That is the primer.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, and then put this up.
And I'll show you what that looks like in the real world. When you have Eco Prim Grip, okay, the first thing that one needs to do when they have this on site is see how it separates due to transportation. You always got to get that a good mix. Okay? Because the sand goes down to the bottom, the water stays on the top.
Can you bring the sand up to show them, Rob? Is there any...
See the sand? That's all sand. And if you don't do this, what the punters do is they put the broiler straight into the water and then apply that onto the floor. That's not how it works. So you've got to get that sand distribution. See the sand there? Which is that sand there, distributed within the product.
So really you should just use that to break up the sand on the bottom and then put a drill paddle in with the cordless.
To give it a good mix.
Give it a good mix, yeah. 2 or 3 minutes, just give it a good mix.
So I'm going right down, I can feel the bottom of the bucket there. So once you've done that with your spatula, then you get your cordless, low speed. See the sand coming up?
Another thing that's we save tape up. If you get this on skirting board, pictures, that type of thing, and it dries,
Tight.
mechanical to get it off.
See the sand in there? That's what you want to see. Beautiful product, huh? If you don't mix it like I just had,
Yeah.
all you're pulling out is just water,
Yeah.
which is grey, but it's got
It
no
don't do-
scent.
yeah.
It's not doing what it's designed to do. Okay?
This is a good product, man.
What is the drying time on this,
So,
Robbie?
according to the TDS, the drying time is 15 to 20 minutes.
Oh, well.
23
And
degrees.
for smoothing at 23 degrees Celsius, 50% relative humidity, and for smoothing, that's for renders, and for smoothing compounds, 30 minutes, which is quick. And when that dries, it dries up to that one, or this one. This one. And that's ready for the subsequent PA, yeah?
How much this will bring up? Half mil, 1 mil?
The Eco Prim Grip's very, very fine. If you run your finger over that, over
Just
from there to
on
there,
the edge, yeah.
I reckon that would be 1.5 mil, 2 mil. Never actually measured it.
Nah, it wouldn't be 2 mil. Lucky if it's a mil.
Yeah, it's probably.
It's whatever the
Mil
thickness
less
of the
maybe.
sand is.
Yeah, because if I'm bringing the floor 3 mil up, plus 1 mil here, so I'm bringing the floor 4 mil up, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on what floor you're starting with. You know, if the floor is the concrete, then it might be, you know, you've got to go to the highest point of the concrete because your levelling compound's always going to come out level.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
3 mil really is, if you've got a floor that's pretty well flat and got maybe a little bit of undulation, 3 mil is good for that. But going over tiles, like I said, you put a straight edge down on those tiles before you start flooding, it'll give you an indication of
What it's
how,
like, yeah.
how much depth you've got to go.
And normally the tiling job's Mickey Mouse. It's, you know, you create more problems when you remove the tiling work. As long as the tiling work is sound, and you can go over it with the Eco Prim Grip. You know, you might have a situation where some of the areas of the tiling work need to be replaced. Okay, before you do the application of the Eco Prim Grip, that's where the NivoRapid comes into play. Because it's a fast setting and curing repair mortar. So you might have a situation whereby you might have 5 or 6 tiles normally in the kitchen area where knives and stuff are dropped, which doesn't matter if you're going to go over the top of it, but they might be drumming, as in loose, because of poor application technique. So what you would do there is you would remove that tile, mix up some NivoRapid, put it in where the tiles come out. That goes off in 30 minutes. Then apply your Eco Prim Grip. Wait 30 minutes, then you level your concrete.
Probably one other thing, Robbie, with the the two products too. With the Mapepur 1K Turbo, it's a moisture curing polyurethane resin, so it cures quicker by the more moisture that's in the air. So the humidity plays a part in that. When you put it on, you must put in a roller tray. Don't ever tip it directly on the concrete because you'll get too much concentrate in one spot and you'll get foaming. So it'll foam and blister, and you can't stick to foam or blister, and you have to sand it. So you really want to be using a 6mm map roller if you can get them, and put it on. So a 10 kilo drum of Mapepur 1K Turbo will do 100 square metres, 100 grams a square metre. You want to see just a shiny film over the whole surface. If you've got dull spots, you need to roll a second bit over that, and you can do that with turbo in as little as 40 minutes. With Primer MF being 100% solids epoxy, when you mix it up in a bucket, because you've got so much volume, it has a exothermic reaction, so it gets hot, and that bucket will get super hot. The more volume you have of it, the quicker the pot lice will shorten. So if you can break it up into some different roller trays and then just use it that way, you'll get more coverage, more working time with it.
Key is make sure that you've got everything prepared. You don't just mix it and have everything prepared when you start. Get the whole thing done quickly.
What would the advantages be on either one? Between turbo and speed?
Single component.
Single
Yep.
component, it's not a two-part.
Oh,
it,
and
it only goes to 95.
95, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so then when you go to the primer MF, that's going to go to 100%
Right.
RH. Right.
That's the difference between the two.
Right. Okay.
Again, you're going to be looking at before you're laying on it. Now,
So why would you need to do that? Like,
depends on what the RH of the slab is. So if the slab's in between 95 and 100,
yep.
you need to go with
That one.
100%
Yep.
epoxy primer.
Okay.
If the slab is probably more than 28 days old and it's up sitting around 93 and it's over that 75
Yep.
RH, you need to go with Mapepur 1K Turbo. So I think APVA still state in most of the timber manufacturers still state 75, even though the new resilient one's 80 RH. That's irrelevant to the timber side of things.
That's the right sand to use here. That's the wrong sand. So you can't use really fine. Got to use that one there. Not just any old sand. It's written on the technical data sheet. Has to be the correct sand, because the difference is you go from this to something that's even finer.
So that's kiln dry 0.9 to 1 mil sand, and it's dry. It's not wet. You can't go to the local park or the beach and fill up your buckets. You know what I mean?
Or to Bunnings and get a wet sand. Like the sands in Bunnings are wet.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna. It's gonna have an adverse
In a
reaction
big area,
when you're trying to stick to these type
you
of
wouldn't go there.
epoxies and polyurethanes.
Yeah. You'll be there a long time.
So what I was going to do is I was going to pour the leveling compound into half of that. I was just going to do a bridge of sand across it. Okay. Build a bridge. 4.8 litres of water. Okay. Put that in there. You always measure your water when you're utilising a leveling compound. And the reason why you do that is because the manufacturer has put kindly for everyone to have a look at the low side and the high side of water. Okay? So 4.6 and 4.8. Now, what happens if you go too low? What happens if you go way past too high? Those two numbers are designed for flow characteristics, what Troy spoke about, the gauge rate. We can plug it straight into the vacuum cleaner, mate. It'll just work straight off the vacuum cleaner. Just take the grinder off and put the vacuum cleaner, put the mixer in there. If you've got a really rough surface, you go high side, get better flow. If you've got a really smooth surface, you can go low side because it's smooth, less resistance. But if you go way past to 4.6, drying characteristics will be different, loss of moisture will be different. It's a higher burn, so you might get more shrinkage marks in the leveling compound. If you go too high, you get separation. You know before when we opened up that Eco Prim Grip and all the water was on the top, all the sand was on the bottom? That's what happens when you overwater a leveling compound. All the heavy components go down, all the water comes up, and what you're left on the surface is all the polymers, which then you're trying to adhere the glue to. Won't work. That's why you've got to stick to those two prescribed measurements, or somewhere in between. Weather conditions, hot, cold, summer, winter, porosity, non-porosity, mechanically keyed surface, non-mechanically keyed surface, moisture vapor barrier, sand-seeded surface, all have different characteristics. And you muck around with that low and high water. So you might mix up the first bag or the first hippo, which is 100 kilos of mix. Water might be too low, you've got to bump it up to the high side. When the guy's mixing up the next load of 4 bags or 5 bags, you go high side, better flow. Then it becomes easier to apply push your stick around. So,
Yeah, that's the best paddle for levelers. With levelers, you're breaking them up. It's not a mortar. So for thixotropic products like...
so the difference here,
you're using spiral.
ceramic tile adhesive, repair mortars, building line, self-levelers. See how there's different categories? The minute you start crossing over your mixing paddle, you're going to get a different experience in your bucket.
So you can get, see the spiral one there? They can also come in a left and a right. So one will suck from the bottom, the other one will suck from the top. So you always
All
got
sorts of different ones.
yeah, that, again, that's good for leveler.
But it's got a
Slight angle to it.
versus straight. So to get into the corner of that bucket, which one do you think is better? Yeah. Okay, so just they're little things, but if you add all the negative things together, it gives you a negative result at the end of the day.
Levelers, you're breaking them.
Where the products to be used, the temperature range, its range of thickness from minimum to maximum, surface preparation, the types of surface preparation, the priming, and that's where the primer is referenced that we just spoke about before, the lower and upper value of water. You always put the water in the bucket first and then the powder in that order, not the other way around. Mixing time, that's important. 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. You see a lot of guys that just go there and woo, 2 minutes, pour it. They don't let all the technology that's in there mix with the water. And then they wonder why there's pinholes, there's aeration, there's polymers that haven't mixed with one another. You've got to let the product interact with the water. That's why there's a time frame for that. When you don't respect that, and the bigger the job, the more critical that is, you start to get issues. You pour it, then start going it over with your trowel. Easy wash up. Time for going over it on the floor for tiles and timber. Very straightforward. And if you follow that, you shouldn't get into trouble. But if you don't follow it, or if you want to on purposely not follow it, ring the rep up and ask him if you can do that. You know, you just heard a couple of tips there. When you do a big 100 square metre floor, there's no need to do the whole moisture vapor barrier. You just do the section that you're going to do for today. Then before you go home, you do the next 30 square metres. That's all planning, huh? That's technique of how you execute your skill on the site.
About 5 litres or
4.8.
4.8.
He's checking with me, you see, because he knows what that's supposed to look like once I put the powder in there.
Always water before powder. Never powder and water. Whale tails as well.
Ready?
Yeah. So that's pretty well lumped through now, after about 1:30. So we'll have that sit for 30 to a minute if you can. So what that's doing, it's wetting out all the polymers and everything in there, and everything is, what's the word for it, disintegrating, you could say. Emulsifying. It's wetting out. So it's, therefore when you go to pour, it's going to flow better and all the rest of it. If you just went and tipped that straight on the floor now, it will not flow as good as it will after you've let it sit for a bit.
It's like when you get told to cook a chicken for an hour, sorry. You don't take it out after 30 minutes. We make the recommendations so you get the best performing product, and when you follow the directions, that's when you get the true product how it's been designed.
And with the other ones that are fibre reinforced in that, we go 2, 2 and 2. 2 minutes mixing, 2 minutes sitting, 2 minutes mixing again. Pour it on the floor. Yeah, the button wouldn't come undone.
Yeah, no, Chris Greenwich used it yesterday and he had mortar all on it, put it straight in there. You see how I went around the edges? You always, irrelevant whether you're using a 100 kilo mix with the Hippo, you always go around the edges because the dry powder always sticks around the edges, and you want to make sure that you get that in the body of the mix as you're going through. Even though the paddle should collect it on the side, it's always a good idea to get because that's part of your mix, huh? It's part of the 20 kilos of product that's in there.
Same with emptying out buckets or hippos. Get it all out, because otherwise, by the time you're on your 10th mix, you're getting older and older and building up older and older stuff that's going on.
Oops. What's the condition of the bunting like? Good?
Yep.
I don't have any breached sections. If I do, just grab that bucket of sand that's just up there. That's it. Yeah, the fine stuff, and we'll just pour it around the edges. You always, whenever you're pouring, let's say that was the first bucket on site. When you go to pour the second bucket, you pour it on a wet edge. You don't pour it on the dry, go back to the wet. You don't do this. You don't do that and let it, you go over the wet edge, yeah?
100 mil over the wet edge.
Approximately, yeah?
So it probably just carries on and just levels it out properly then, right?
Yeah.
Because like that, you're obviously building 2 different levels on you.
Yeah, what can happen if it's in summer and it's really dry, really hot, and you pour that and you've gone back and you're on your own, or 1 or 2 guys, you're mixing in a hippo, you've only got 1 hippo,
yeah,
it'll roll over the top of that one, it won't blend, and you'll get a breach.
right, and then yeah.
That's running pretty good, and that's on sand. It's not, sand slows it up a little bit too. So that's see what the stand-up trowel. You only want to be doing what Robbie's doing with the small trowel. Just like same thing, it's just bigger and you're not bending down.
I won't do that. That way you can see the difference between me dealing with it and not.
You can almost see it
You
now.
can see it already anyway.
So that's
Yeah,
it.
you shouldn't have to touch. Yeah, just put some of the first on.
You don't keep playing with it, that's it.
Yes. Okay.
You know what I mean? As quick as you do it.
And you know how Joy was saying about the 3mm minimum, you check your floor out first to see what the highest spot is on the tiling work, and that's the flood plate that you put onto that, you know what I mean? Which might take it over 3mm depending on what the highest spot is. But whether you go over it with a trowel or just leave it as it is, that characteristic is called the healing characteristic. So when I run something through, see how it self-heals? It just keeps on doing that for at least the first 15 minutes. Which is the part that is referencing to the next pour that's going into it. Yeah? You always like to have all the guys that do this type of work are very regimental in their process. 5.2, that's okay.
Okay with that. I said I said what he said.
Yeah, see, but that we come back to the conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
He said, they said, everyone said.
He was just proving a point. You need to check regardless.
Exactly.
I remember coming here when I first started.
I don't want to get sacked by the boss.
I thought I knew everything. I knew nothing. I remember arguing with Bobby for months on G19, telling it gassed off, and that's how he got bubbles until he proved me wrong.
So what, they've just put stone in it? Yeah, right. Okay.
They're mine. Yep, you can't touch those, I'm sorry.
They put epoxy on.
They're for my area here.
Epoxy on.
Sorry.
In it. Then level something over the top of that thing.
Yeah, right.
For a high strength leveling from here,
Yeah.
fast
Wow, yeah.
in as little as 2 hours. And that's at 23 to go. If it's 30 plus.
I reckon that'd be alright, eh? Doing that in your house, like.
Yeah, it's a bit darker.
Yeah, well, it's not going to be the same as, I suppose, it's normal concrete, but still. So you can always put it around the bottom of the plane.
And that's a rough finish too, huh? Anyway. Oh, nearly lost my hat.
You can see the different chemistries for the different colours.
So we've gone from 4.8 litres high into water
5.2.
in the Eco to 5.2.
You can even see the difference in the texture as well, don't you?
Oh, they're both smooth. This actually looks like burning steel when it dries after 24 hours.
I won't touch that last section, I'll just leave that as it.
This thing just stays wet, then it just goes bang. Dry.
Yeah.
1 hour, just like that.
What if I
955 and the 990. So the 955 is a,
Modified ciliated polyurethane.
and this one is moisture cure. The difference you go over a concrete substrate with this one here, because there's moisture contained in that, it doesn't get very big air pockets in it, because the moisture is allowed to be lost in the product into the substrate. If you're going over a moisture vapor barrier, right, the scintillated one is better, because it doesn't rely on any moisture being lost out of the product. When you try and use this one over that, it gets bigger air pockets in it under microscope, less adhesion.
So that's why sometimes you might hear people where they do put Mapei down, they may put P990 down over turbo, and they can still lift the board the next day.
There's still adhesion there, but because it gets air pockets developing, that's less surface area, you get a higher possibility of being able to pull it off easier. Whereas this one here doesn't rely on that technology. Right?
Yep.
Now, having said that, how many times does a concrete substrate get evaluated incorrectly? Right? You use the 990 over something that's dense and is like a moisture vapor barrier, not going to work too well, is it? Unless you put a leveling compound over it, then you've reset the substrate, then the 990 will work.
The other thing, think of the open times between the two products. So Ultraplan Eco S9551K, 60 minutes. Ultraplan P990 1K, 110 minutes. Open time. So a lot of people will use that just for its open time.
If you're doing parquetry, you would use that.
Yeah, but if you're putting it directly to a moisture vapor barrier, it's extending that time.
Right, yeah.
So you shouldn't be sanding solid timber or anything for at least minimum 3 days. With the S955 over over a moisture vapor barrier, it's 2.5 times stronger than the P990.
Then you've got all the other things going on too. You've got temperature, humidity, summer, winter, the species of timber, bada bing, bada boom. You've also got sometimes the plank flooring that's lacquered on the back as well. That's like this.
And let's not forget there's another technology that we don't really carry here. Or we're not. But see the EC1 Plus?
Yep.
EC1 Plus. The other product that you do sell, which is T55, you're not going to get any of those certifications because it's high in solvents and it might have a faster drying or something like that. But it's not something that we would.
You've got to remember too the country we live in.
Yeah.
We're a vast nation from Tasmania, Melbourne, right up to Townsville, Cairns, Darwin. Different humidities, different weathers.
If you've got a protective layer on the back of the timber, which some of the species, some of the manufacturers use the spray that they put on the face, on the back, that's like having a moisture vapor barrier on the underside. So it's double whammy. To understand just the fundamental difference between this one and that one.
And what about with the other epoxy, or
the MF versus the turbo? It's the same principle.
Same principle.
So NivoRapid and Latex Plus, we're going to mix that up, right? So for timber, if you've got a timber floor and you want to do a ramp up.
So this is where I guess for us, we in the past haven't sold anything, and people ask me all the time about ramping. This is what I should have for ramping.
Yeah, so linkways, right? I've had linkways where they've put ply down between two government buildings or housing and all that sort of stuff, and they've dropped it down 30 mil and they need a ramp to go up. Or when NivoRapid's mixed with Latex Plus, it will go from 1 mil to one
together.
bottle of Latex Plus will do 2 bags of NivoRapid.
Right.
5 kilos each bag.
This is our Latex Plus mixed with NivoRapid, and the percentage is 36%, which equates to, here, 7.2 kilos of latex to a 20 kilo bag. Okay? And can you see the consistency of that? It's very, very runny.
Yeah.
And that's for localized smoothing and repairing, where you want to skim coat it.
Right.
Okay, which is the consistency that you would want it at. Okay. But if you're ramping, you wouldn't be able to ramp with that.
No, that's definitely not.
It'd be very difficult, wouldn't it?
Never
And this is mixed with Latex Plus, which is that's Latex Plus there, and that's NivoRapid behind you. So obviously you would have a primed surface or a scarified surface or a moisture vapor barrier surface. So for skim coating, got a latex in it, high side, according to TDS. And the granulometry of the sand won't let me go down to feather edge because the coarseness of the sand physically won't allow me to do that. Now I'll just go and wash this, and I'm going to mix it up now with water, low side of the TDS, because there's a low side and a high side of water, and there's a low side and a high side with the latex, to do two different jobs. Ramping is one issue, skim coating is another issue. So you wouldn't use the low water to do skim coating because it's just too hard to push around. That's why you go high side. But it's got a latex mixed in with it, so the latex is also doing a little bit of the binding as well. Let's go and wash this, and I'll mix up the low side of the
I might normally do this for timber floors. For timber floors, we might normally do this because you can fill the joints. Or metal as well. We can do that straight away.
We go on to pretty much any surface.
Yeah, so this would be if the floor is pretty much flat, but you're going to be installing vinyl over it. So vinyl, obviously, different to hybrids or anything like that, where it allows a little bit of movement. Vinyl, anything fine, you will see it. Especially commercial vinyl, where it's big roll.
Yeah.
Just out, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah. What time is it now?
2:20.
2:20. Yeah. What time have you got to be out of here? What time do you?
2:30.
2:30. All right. Yeah. I think it's just about finished anyway. So.
Let me take a photo for you guys.
I'm doing small quantities because I've only got a small area to do, but if you were doing, let's say, a big ramp, I don't know, Coles or Woolies, where you got all the pallet jacks going, motorised pallet jacks going up over.
Yeah, so you've got a gradual.
You've got to come out 3 or 4 metres and go from. Normally, when you do a ramp, you should never go feather edge with your ramping material. You should always rebate a cut into the concrete in a straight line and send your repair mortar, your ramping mortar into that rebate. Because that way, when the heavy round point loaded of the 3 wheels on the reach truck impact that, there's at least 2 or 3 millimetre of this. This dries up to 50 MPa, 48, 50 MPa, it's very hard.
Right.
But when you go to 0 with something, and you get that, so you do a check out, just get your angle grinder, just cut a line with the straight edge, mark it with the pencil, cut it, and then have that ramping material go to that line. It's good practice, depending how far you've got to go out. And then you normally have 2 guys on a straight edge, one on the top, one on the bottom, and the third guy is mixing and putting in the product in front of the straight edge. You just
Work it.
once you've left it, you don't touch it anymore. So I'm going to mix up enough just to do a bit of a ramp here. And, so this is NivoRapid in here. We're testing some at the moment, so I just grabbed some out of there. So I'll go about About 2 kilos. About 3 kilos. Just got to work out 3 kilos, and on the TDS, the 3 kilo for a 20 kilo bag. When you're mixing it with water, low side's 4.2 litres, high side's 4.6 litres. See the difference between the latex and the water? 4.6 is low, 7.2 is high, and for the water it's 4.2 and 4.6. So where the water, the high of the water is where the latex starts. You see that? Yeah. There's a reason for that, because it's latex versus water, different chemistry involved, yeah? Big difference from that to that, eh?
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine if I mixed and I got it all wrong and I ring up the rev, oh, it's got, you know?
That'd be brilliant for skin coating, wouldn't it?
For what?
Skin coating.
Not so much.
It's got to be quick. Small area at a time.
So generally what they'll do, they'll get it to that stage, leave it for 10-15 minutes, they'll continue doing the ramp. Then after 10-15 minutes, all the slaggy bits will be a little bit firmer. Just come through, shave it off, and you can manipulate it, get it a lot better.
But I'm the mechanic, because I've used 21% water, 23% water. But if I F that up and you go 7.2, you end up with, you can still use a product,
Yeah.
but it's not designed for the ramping side of things. And if you let it cook, in other words, let the hydration kick in and all the rest of it, you get less work time. So by controlling it from the outset, reading the TDS, understanding what you want to do, then you go and execute. In your boat, the buoyancy.
That'll be enough, Rob. It'll keep growing, won't it?
Then you get a knife and you just cut that off.
Yeah.
Once it goes up.
And you can put your renovation over the top of that when you prime the rest of the floor.
You're right.
So some application examples for this, they say thermal insulation, soundproofing of door frames, window frames, roller blind housings, filling in insulating gaps between different types of building materials, fixed with support frames in place of door and window fittings, filling the insulation gaps between frames, walls, door frames, and fittings, when installing doors and windows. Insulating through pipes.
Thank you guys, that concludes our training for the levelers and primers and a little bit on the adhesives with the guys from Mapei. We hope you got something from it. If you do need any more information, please make sure you contact one of us or check down in the links below to see the link for episode 2 where we do a little bit more information on the same type of products. Please make sure you like and subscribe to keep up for the latest videos. Our next one is going to be on some Festool products and all the latest products that they've got out, which is usually the most popular ones that we do. So be sure to subscribe so you can be first to see the Festool videos as soon as they come out. Thank you again and see you next time.